Good evening, everyone. We're really happy you're here. We're going to get started in a few moments. We're going to allow folks to trickle on, and then we'll be getting started in about 2 minutes. But we're happy to have you here.
Hi, everyone. As we wait for a few more folks to join us, just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. So if you have questions throughout tonight's presentation, you can drop them in the by using the Q&A button. That way we can make sure we see your question. And we are going to have the chat closed um, for this event. But so if you do have a question, again, drop it in the Q&A box. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get started, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Inella.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So, good evening again, everyone. My name is Inella Ray. I'm the Director of Parent Advocacy and Engagement here at Children First. So, I see a few familiar names and also some new ones. So, happy to have you here in community with all of us. And so, as Kevin mentioned, you'll hear from a few of us this evening. I'll give everyone an opportunity just to identify themselves and their role, and then we'll get started officially with the presentation. All right, so I'm going to first pass it to my colleague, Kevin, and then we'll do a quick whip around and then we'll get on with the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Burgess, and I am the Civic Engagement Manager here at Children First, and I'll pass it to my colleague, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Arbutina, and I lead child welfare and juvenile justice policy work at Children First. Great to be here.
And then, Kadita, did you
Oh,
want to
sorry,
share?
I didn't.
Yeah,
Kadita,
yeah.
okay, good to you.
No
Sorry.
worries.
All right. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Kadita Kenner, founding CEO of the New Pennsylvania Project and New PA Project Education Fund. Happy to be with you all today.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Kevin, when you're ready. I'm ready. All right. So we wanted to share a little bit about who we are as an organization, Children First. Many of you may know on the call, but to make sure that everyone is level setting from the same plane, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the work that we do. So at the very baseline, we work to improve the life and the life chances of children within the Southeastern region. And we really do that work in deep coalition with many of you who are on the call. So we work from the grass tops to the grassroots and really believe that it takes everyone to really come together to really fight for the things that our children need. And we do that through research, advocacy, and mobilization. And we've been around for 45 years and counting. Next slide, please. And so we work across four distinct policy areas. So we work across early childhood education, K-12 education, health, and vulnerable youth. So the nature of this work today really focuses within the vulnerable youth frame, but also cuts across some of the other policy areas as well with some of the issues that we'll be talking about. But we thought it was really important to talk about the courts because Pennsylvania is one of the few places in the country where we get to elect our judges. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin, who really has been leading the efforts of our judicial work and why we're doing this work particularly now. So Kevin.
Yes, hi. Thanks. Thank you, Inella. And so As we all know, that courts and judges have a huge impact on the lives of children and families, both at the individual level and systemically. And as some of y'all may or may not know, there's a big election coming up on Tuesday, November 4th, where Pennsylvanians will get to choose who serves on our courts, from the Supreme Court all the way down to the municipal courts. And we are one of the few states that elect judges. However, unfortunately, turnout for these races is incredibly low. And so that's why over the past 6 months, we've been exploring how we can educate folks about the courts, with the end goal of ensuring that Pennsylvania's judiciary is doing right by children and families. And so now, without further ado, I want to turn it over to Kadita Kenner, Executive Director of New PA Project Education Fund, who's a voting rights and courts expert. So yeah, Kadita.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. So happy to be with you all tonight. There's so many other places you could be, and here you are on a Wednesday night wanting to hear about the courts. And so grateful to have this opportunity. Well, we're going to have a good time with this tonight because I believe that in order to talk about the courts for a good 40 minutes, you need to make this kind of entertaining. So I'm going to show a PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to talk about the importance of the judiciary here in Pennsylvania, and we're also going to talk about why courts matter. So give me 1 second, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. Mhm. Okay, we're seeing me okay? Slides? Yes, we're good. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, who is the New PA Project Education Fund? So happy to be here on behalf of the New PA Project Education Fund. We're a nonpartisan organization, and we do this work that we do statewide. We are led by community leaders, and that's our full-time and our part-time staff. And we are centering communities of color in our work because they're the most historically disenfranchised communities. We're centering immigrant communities in the work that we do, and the youth. And if you're joining us today and you're under the age of 35, we consider you a youth. So welcome to that. And the work that we do is trying to provide civic education. And as we all know, current climate that we're in, it seems that students are learning less and less about civics. And so we find ourselves as an organization on the ground providing civic education and trying to engage folks so that we can deepen democracy. And so we are going to do this year round, and we have been as an organization. The primary work that we do is voter registration. And as an organization in the last few years, we've assisted more than 60,000 Pennsylvanians in getting registered to vote. So I'm grateful to be with you here today. All right. So I always start my conversations and presentations centering us in a good place. And a good place for me is wherever John Lewis was. And the late, great Congressman John Lewis reminds us that the vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent that we have in a democratic society. And yes, we Pennsylvanians, we have a lot to do in the coming days and weeks as we are coming up on judicial, municipal, and local elections. In Pennsylvania, we vote every year, twice a year, not just the presidential election years. And I'd argue that these local and municipal elections probably matter more to our daily lives than even these presidential and federal elections. Okay, so why elections matter. So you're joining today for the Why Courts Matter 101. So hopefully, if you're here on a Wednesday night to hear this presentation, I probably don't need to tell you why elections matter as well, but they do. And so it's really important that we pinpoint some of the issues here in the Commonwealth that should make people want to get out there and cast a ballot every 6 months. I'll tell you that yesterday was National Voter Registration Day, and I was on the campus of St. Joseph's University doing voter registration for young folks. And it was disheartening to hear how so many chose not to want to engage or hear about voter registration or be registered to vote on that college campus yesterday. And I always say that we have to give young people a reason to actually want to get involved in deepening democracy. The life hasn't been easy the last several years for many. And so it is very hard to try to turn folks around who have been disengaged from this process. And I will tell you that as an organization, we center young folks, but we have registered 2 100-year-old women to vote as well in our work. And both of these women never registered before. And one said that she was getting registered for the first time only because someone asked her to. So there's a lot out here. And in Pennsylvania, there are a lot of folks who are not registered to vote. More than 1.5 million Pennsylvanians are eligible to vote, but not registered. 1.5 million eligible to vote, but not registered at all. So elections do matter. They especially matter in Pennsylvania, where we get to vote every 6 months. And I also like to talk to young folks in this work about how politics is everywhere, right? There will be some people will come across on the ground who will say, oh, I don't want to get registered to vote. I'm just not into politics. I'm just not into the political thing. That's not for me. And my rebuttal is always going to be, well, politics are into you. And we may not realize how much of our lives are political. We may associate this with what's happening in Harrisburg or what's happening in DC. And just know that politics are everywhere and they consume our daily lives, whether we like it or not, or understand that or not. And I think about this room that I'm in today, Children's First. You probably care a lot about education funding. You probably care a lot about school board elections. And these are things that are popping up this year, as well as affordable housing being the number one issue in Pennsylvania and many other places that folks just can't afford to live. And when we think about young people and how they learn best, right? It is to have a place, a roof over your head and some food in your belly, and you're able to learn. So elections matter for our kids. It matters for our older folks. It matters for everybody. And our lives are political, whether we like it or not. Okay. I am a history buff. Any other history buffs in the room here today? Any other history buffs in the Zoom room? I can't see the comments, so maybe somebody will tell me if something's going off down there in the comment section. But I like to center conversations in history as well. And I show you this image, and this is an image captured in the 1950s. And in the 1950s, a very turbulent time in American history, we had Chief Justice Earl Warren of the United States Supreme Court there overturning so much of Jim Crow legislation that was in our federal government. So you may ask, why am I showing pictures of the United States Supreme Court when we're supposed to be talking about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today? Well, they're both relative to our discussion. And so if we think about going back to our 10th grade or 12th grade years in school, we learned about federalism. We learned that there is a federal court system, and we learned that there is a state court system. And sometimes they come together in ways. And in this particular time in history, in the 50s, 1950s, it was Chief Justice Earl Warren of the United States Supreme Court and his fellow justices, associate justices, who were overturning Jim Crow laws. And when I think about those, here I am with Children's First today, one of those being the Brown versus Board of Education case, probably the most famous that we could probably say out loud and know. And Brown versus Board of Education overturned the fact that folks initially thought that separate could be equal. And we know that separation of folks is not equality. And so it was the overturning of Brown versus Board of Education by Chief Justice Earl Warren in his court with a unanimous decision, 9-0, in the 50s that allowed for us to go to school together, allowed for us to break bread together, it allowed for us to walk in the same doors together and be together as people. And so this upset some folks, including the John Birch Society. And so it upset them so much about what Chief Justice Earl Warren was doing that they put these billboards up in the sky, and not just down south either. These billboards were up in the sky in Atlantic City as well, wanting Americans to reach out to their elected officials to impeach Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren. So why am I showing you this 50s picture from the South? And we all heard the saying before that if we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. And so I show you this because in 2018, we tried to repeat what was happening in the 50s. We had legislators in Harrisburg very upset about our Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturning a very gerrymandered map. And I'm going to show you what that map looks like in a second. And so this was an attempt in Harrisburg to get rid of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices who ruled in a way that they did not like, not liking decisions, wanting to remove them from the bench. And so this was the congressional map that we had to vote on back in 2017. So if you've been voting since 2017 or before, this was our congressional map. This is a map of 18 congresspeople who represent Pennsylvania in Washington, D.C. And this map is what was called by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court a political or partisan gerrymander. And I'm going to explain to you what that means right now. So if you look at this map and you see it represented in 18 different districts in which you can vote for, you may locate yourself. And I know a lot of you may be joining today from southeastern Pennsylvania. I want to draw your attention to that bottom right area here in Pennsylvania. And I want you to see number 6, Congressional District 6. I want you to see Congressional District 16. Now, in this area, you will see the city of Reading. And the city of Reading is the 5th largest city in Pennsylvania. It's home to a lot of Black and brown folks. And the city of Reading, as you can see in this map, was taken, it's purple, it's that purple pink color. It was taken out of Berks County, where the city of Reading is, that green number 6 congressional district. They took just the city of Reading, just those folks that live in the city of Reading, and they moved them into Congressional District 16, into Lancaster County. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to take a community out of its county and out of its neighboring areas, contiguous areas? Why would you want to do that and stick it into a place that is unfamiliar to them with folks that may not have the same values or believe in the same things they do, or may have different representation? You do that to dilute the voting power of those folks that lived in the city of Reading. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saw this map and said, this map is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional because it's a political partisan gerrymandering. It was the ability of legislators to create this map, of which they did. Pennsylvania legislators in Harrisburg created this congressional map. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that they did that in a way to benefit their own political parties. And so the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, we will no longer have this map. And in 2018, we got to vote on a map that looked like this. And this was the congressional district map that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court instilled for us to vote on in 2018. And as you can see, now in Congressional District 9, Berks County is all together, and the city of Reading is in Berks County where it belongs. So I'm going to go back. This is a bad gerrymander. Very bad. Redistricting, gerrymandering is all bad in that way, and a much better map. It's not perfect, but it's much better. Okay. So what is gerrymandering? It's actually named after a gentleman. And gerrymandering, as the verb, it is a way to manipulate boundaries so that it favors one political party or one political class of folks. And legislators who draw maps might gerrymander in order to receive a result that they want. It's a way to manipulate boundaries so that you can receive the electoral constituency that a legislator might want there to be versus us. And if I break this down on a 4th grade level for the average person to understand, gerrymandering is when elected officials choose us and not us as the electorate choosing our elected officials. And I would argue that gerrymandering is bad. All forms of gerrymandering are bad. And it's a problematic thing no matter who does it or for what reason they do it. There are various types of gerrymandering. There is political partisan gerrymandering, as I just showed you with that example from the city of Reading. There is prison gerrymandering, which you give more power to the folks that live in a community that may have a prison when those in prison actually don't have rights themselves. There's judicial gerrymandering that I'll explain in a second. And there's racial gerrymandering, when you are gerrymandering folks based on their race. And I'd argue that Reading not only was a partisan political gerrymandering, but probably a political one as well. Racial one as well, excuse me. So there's 2 ways to actually gerrymander. And I'm sure that all of us watching here today, we've probably heard the word gerrymandering or redistricting more in the last month or so than we've ever had before, because it's been making national news. You know, the things that are happening in Texas and the response out of California. has now probably the best thing that has come out of this is the fact that we have so many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans who understand what gerrymandering is for the first time in their lives, unless they remember the lesson back in the 10th grade, if they're actually even still teaching this. So there's two ways, two principal tactics to gerrymander. So you can dilute voting power by cracking an area, or you can pack an area and concentrate people into one district so that they probably only have the ability as one community to elect one elected official of their choosing. I would argue if we have some folks on the call here today from the Philadelphia area, you may recognize what could be packing in Philadelphia, where you put all the Black folks together into one congressional district to allow them the opportunity to elect one person versus spreading out the folks in Philadelphia, and putting districts together. So just not all of Northeast looks one way and all of West Philadelphia looks one way. So cracking and packing are two tactics of gerrymandering. And again, I would consider gerrymandering all bad, no matter who does it and for what reason. It's a way to manipulate. And this is another one of the reasons why young folks and everyone else, are really experiencing a moment in time where they don't believe in democracy and that we are actually doing the right things and that they are powerful in this moment. So I showed you the first attack that has been on the independent judiciary here in Pennsylvania, and that was the attempt to impeach our Supreme Court justices based upon decisions they were making, the one to overturn that gerrymandered map. And now there was a second attempt because the first attempt to impeach didn't work. Then we had legislators in Harrisburg trying to change the way that we, as very powerful Pennsylvania voters, actually get to elect our judges and justices. As Kevin mentioned at the top of this call today, Pennsylvania voters, we are very powerful. We're one of only 7 states in the entire country that we get to elect all of our judges and justices in partisan elections. There's only 6 other states besides us that have that power. Who are they? Ohio, Illinois, North Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas. Those are the only other states that elect all their judges and justices the exact same way in which we do here in the Commonwealth. Well, there was an attempt by the legislature in Harrisburg to change the way that we get to elect all of our judges and justices. How many of you have been voting in Pennsylvania for the last 22 years? Let's see if anybody's hands goes up or recognizing this. If you've been a voter in Pennsylvania for the last 22 years, you've been able to elect every single judge and justice that sits on our intermediate and appellate courts in Pennsylvania, all 31 of those individuals. You've had that power if you've been voting that long in Pennsylvania. You're responsible for those folks being on the bench. Well, House Bill 38, what that was going to do, it was going to gerrymander the judiciary. It was going to change it so that we don't get to vote statewide for all 31 of those judges and justices that sit on the Commonwealth Court, that sit on the Superior Court, that sit on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. You'd only be able to vote for one of those judges, justices in each of those courts. So you'd be able to vote for one judge on the Supreme, one judge on the Commonwealth, and one judge on the Superior. And I'd argue if we are allowed to vote for our judges here in Pennsylvania, I want to vote for all of them, not just the 3 that some elected official tells me I can, because they draw a map. And we know if we allow legislators to draw maps, they're going to draw them in the favor of their friends and family in in Congress or on judgeships or wherever. And so we knew as a coalition, a fight back table, that this had to be defeated, that House Bill 38 was going to have to be defeated because it was going to be a constitutional amendment change. It was going to change our Pennsylvania Constitution, and it was going to change the way in which we elect our judges and justices. And what we do know in Pennsylvania is that when we get a ballot and our ballot is asking us a question, that question is usually worded in a way that sounds pretty good. And it makes Pennsylvanians want to say yes to that ballot question or that constitutional amendment change question. And so we knew that if House Bill 38 was turned into a form, into language on your ballot, you might think that that sounded good, but we knew it was going to be problematic. And so I'm happy to say that Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania, a project of the organization I'm representing today, was one of the lead organizations bringing together 150 plus other organizations across the Commonwealth. And we threw down together because we knew that House Bill 38 was going to be a problem. And we stopped it. We stopped it from appearing on your ballot. And we did such a great job of that. We made the front page of the New York Times. And so you'll see the work of Why Courts Matter, the coalition, the Fight Back table. You will see how it made the front page of the New York Times to say that we were fighting back against any attempts to take away our power, our very powerful way in which we elect our judges and justices in the Commonwealth. So who are our Supreme Court justices? So again, federalism, we have a United States Supreme Court, we have a Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And in Pennsylvania, we are one of the oldest courts here in Pennsylvania in the nation, right? So we're one of the older states, so of course we're going to have the oldest courts. And it was founded in 1722. And as the highest court in the land, there are 7 justices on our Pennsylvania Supreme Court compared to the 9 on the United States Supreme Court. What's different is the United States Supreme Court, those folks are confirmed for a lifetime. And in Pennsylvania, you elect them for a 10-year term. So they don't stay on the bench forever. And I would also say that after the 10-year term, you will then have the option to retain them to stay another 10-year term. Now, the first time that we actually do elections for people, the first time they sit on the bench, is done in partisan elections, meaning you will see a D or R after their name when you go to elect them. When there's a vacancy on the bench to fill, you will see a D or R after someone's name so you recognize what political party is supporting them. And after they have served their 10-year term and there are retention elections to get them to stay on or not for another 10-year term, you will not see the D or R after their name. The current makeup of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And I draw your attention to the center, which is Chief Justice Deborah Todd. She is the first woman Chief Justice in Pennsylvania Supreme Court history. So a court that's been around for more than 300 years, it took us to just recently to actually have our first woman Chief Justice, and Chief Justice Deborah Todd. Okay, so these different attacks on judicial fairness and judicial independence, the attempt to impeach, then it was the attempt to gerrymander and change the way that we as very powerful voters have an opportunity to put judges on a bench. That took a little more than 2 years to overcome that legislation, House Bill 38. And now anti-retention campaign that has been launched to want people to vote no on judicial retention. And so here I join you today as a nonpartisan organization. I'm not here to tell you which way to go, whether you should vote yes or no. That's something that you and your family will have to consider on your own and within your own values. But what I can say historically is that Pennsylvania has retained every Supreme Court justice that has been up for retention. And we've had this system since 1968. And they've retained every single Supreme Court justice except for one. And that was Justice Nigro, who was removed from the bench when Pennsylvanians voted no on his retention. And some would say that Justice Nigro was part of a campaign in which Pennsylvanians were very upset about pay increases that were given to the 3 branches of government in Harrisburg. And because Pennsylvanians were so upset about that happening earlier in the summer, Justice Nigro was the first person on their ballot they could take their anger out on, and did so by not deciding not to retain him. That's what some may say happened in that certain situation. But besides that, Pennsylvanians majorly retain judges and justices. I'd also like to say that in Pennsylvania, our judges also age out at the age of 75. So it's not a lifetime appointment. You can't just keep getting 10-year terms renewed, forever. At the age of 75 in Pennsylvania, judges are removed from the bench, and then there's a vacancy that's created to replace them. All right, so these were the different attacks that have been on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and judicial fairness. These are our current Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania, and I have red stars next to the 3 that are up for retention election. They're standing for retention this November 4th or before if you're voting by mail. These 3 justices were elected for the very first time 10 years ago. So you saw them on your ballot 10 years ago, and some of you may have said yes to have them be added to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and that was in 2015. So here we are, 10 years later, and now it is their 10-year term is up. And now Pennsylvanians, you need to decide whether or not to retain them for another 10-year term. So I want to give you the scenarios, what could happen if either situation occurs. So let's say that all of the justices are retained. That just means they'll serve another 10-year term until they age out. Let's say that all three of these justices are not retained, that Pennsylvanians decide not to retain all three. What would happen, or if they retain not even one of them, what would happen is that this would create a vacancy on the Supreme Court, because in a retention election, these justices are standing for retention. They're not running against a candidate. They're not running against anybody else. There is no one to fill their spot. So if you do not retain them, it creates a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Now, how the vacancies could be filled, according to our Constitution, Pennsylvania Constitution, Governor Josh Shapiro would have the ability to appoint someone in an interim position. But in order for them to actually be placed on the bench, they would need to be also confirmed by the Pennsylvania Senate. So the governor and the PA Senate would need to agree that an individual deserves to be in that interim spot. And I will tell you, as someone who plays the Powerball when it gets really high, you probably have a better shot at winning the Powerball than having both the governor and the Pennsylvania Senate agree on this. So if these justices are not retained, it creates a vacancy on the bench. And if all three are not retained, what would happen is you would only have 4 Supreme Court justices on the bench for 2 years, because they would not be replaced until the next judicial election. And we have judicial elections every odd year. So for more than 2 years, there would be vacancies on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And that would likely mean that there would be no decisions made. There'd be no rulings on the Supreme Court for more than a 2-year period at that point. And that would absolutely cause a little judicial chaos here in the Commonwealth if we don't have a full complement on our Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So it is Christine Donahue, Kevin Dougherty, and David Wecht are the 3 Supreme Court justices that will be on your ballot. And as I said, retention elections, they are nonpartisan in Pennsylvania. So you will not see a D or an R after their names when you get your ballot and you vote it. You will only see their names, and you, as Pennsylvania powerful voters, say yes or no. Because there is the argument that after being on the bench for quite some time, it should not matter what political party these judges and justices belong to. They should be judged based upon how they've interpreted the Pennsylvania Constitution in the last 10 years or not. And I also like to say that judges and justices, they don't wear red. They don't wear blue robes. They wear black robes for the people. They wear black robes for the Constitution. Okay. So there is order in the courts. There's levels to this. And there are 4 levels to us having judges and the court system here in Pennsylvania. So at the bottom of the pyramid is minor courts. And we call them minor courts, but when you can sentence somebody to some jail time, it's not so minor. But there's a lot of these judges across the Commonwealth, and we elect them in districts. There's a whole bunch. There's more than 500 minor court judges in the Commonwealth. The next level up is the Court of Common Pleas, and they're going to hear cases. They're a trial court, so you could have jury duty. If you have jury duty, you're probably on the Court of Common Pleas, jury duty. And they're going to hear cases that the minor courts just can't handle. They're going to hear more serious cases. They'll hear cases about civil and criminal cases. And the majority of all cases are heard by these 2 levels of courts in Pennsylvania. The next level up, the orange area there, is our intermediate appellate court level. That's the Commonwealth Court, which is uniquely Pennsylvanian, and the Superior Court. And these courts will hear cases that came from below. And so if there was something that was decided in the Court of Common Pleas that someone wants to appeal for any various reason, it would go up to the Superior Court and or the Commonwealth Court to hear that case. And then the final top of the pyramid there is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And you probably do have a better shot of winning the Powerball than actually having your case heard by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so here is a lot of information here about the levels of the courts. I'm going to provide this PowerPoint presentation to your host for this evening. If they would like to share this out, that's a thing that could absolutely happen. So you have this civic education. So minor courts, very important. There are magisterial courts and municipal courts on the minor court level. And I will tell you all this. This is also very important for you to hear. You do not need to be a lawyer. You do not need to be a lawyer to be a magisterial court judge. You don't need to be a lawyer. All you need to be able to do is win your election and then take that baby bar or that Kim Kardashian bar and pass that test, and you can be a sitting judge in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The minor courts right now are filled with lots of ex-police officers. That's kind of like a retirement job for police officers that they become magisterial judges. So if you're someone that loves the law, would like to be a judge at the minor level, you can absolutely become a magisterial judge in Pennsylvania without a law degree. All right, so there's lots of judges there at that minor level. They're going to hear cases about tickets, parking tickets, moving violations, small claims, evictions. These are the types of cases heard by the minor courts. Now, that court only has 6-year terms. So all the others have a 10-year term. The minor courts have 6-year terms. So after you elect them the first time, you will see them on a retention ballot 6 years later. And again, you will not see a D or an R after their name, just their name, and you say yes or no. Then there's the Court of Common Pleas level. Again, a lot of judges there, more than 450 judges sit at the Court of Common Pleas level. They're going to hear some more serious cases, more major criminal and civil cases, divorce, felony cases, child custody, landlord disputes, property disputes. Those are the types of cases heard by the Court of Common Pleas. The next level up, again, our intermediate appellate court level, Superior Court and Commonwealth Court. They are a court that will hear appeals from the courts below. The Commonwealth Court, uniquely Pennsylvanian, they'll hear cases of agency. And so if you all are familiar with a recent Commonwealth Court decision that said Pennsylvanians are not receiving a fair, equitable education, that came out of the Commonwealth Court. The Commonwealth ruled that Pennsylvanians funding our public schools by property tax was not the way to go. And it was not leading to an equitable education for our young people. And so they ruled it to be that way and then told the legislature in Harrisburg to figure it out. What is the new way in which you're going to fund public education so that it is fair and equitable? And so that if you go to Lower Merion or Radnor High School, you have the same education as someone who goes to Overbrook or Central High or any other place. So that was a ruling that came out of the Commonwealth Court. The final level up is that Supreme Court. Again, the 7 justices, the 10-year terms. They did a school funding challenge was one of those cases that, they didn't really need to hear because they agreed with the decision of the Commonwealth Court. But the Supreme Court will hear lots of cases in the next several years, particularly around our voting rights and other issues that you may find important. Okay. And someone I find important is this woman right here. This is Miss Viviette Applewhite out of Philadelphia. And I like to show you the real people behind these cases that you may have heard of or not, because a lot of times these courts are pretty abstract. Sometimes we have, as citizens, as residents of Pennsylvania, we may have a negative connotation of courts. We may only associate courts with a bad day and not a great day. We may only associate courts with the criminal court system and not so much the court system that could actually provide and grant rights and freedoms. And so I love to show you the pictures of the lead litigants of cases that were heard by our appellate courts. And this is Miss Viviette Applewhite. And in this picture, she's in her 90s. And Miss Viviette Applewhite was going to have an issue in voting in the 2012 election because there was a law passed by legislators in Harrisburg that was going to put a more restrictive voter ID in place. And I want you all to hear me say this. We are having free and fair elections in Pennsylvania. We have a voter ID law in Pennsylvania, and only citizens are actually being registered to vote and voting in the Commonwealth. And so the legislators in Harrisburg wanted to institute a more restrictive voter ID, which was going to stop Miss Viviette Applewhite from actually being able to cast her ballot. Why? It was going to be restrictive in a way that she was not going to be able to gain access to the ID that was going to be necessary. If you look at Miss Viviette Applewhite, here's a picture of her on the bottom right there at her 100th birthday. A Black woman born in the early 1900s, probably not born in a hospital, probably not having access to a birth certificate. And in her 90s, she's probably not driving. She's probably not going to the DMV to get an ID. She may not have broadband access or be burning up the internet to actually go online to get this. There's many reasons why someone such as Ms. Vivian Applewhite would not be able to come up with a more restrictive voter ID. And so it was the court, it was the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania that said that 2012 voter ID law was too restrictive. It was going to be a barrier to voting. It was going to disenfranchise and suppress the vote of Ms. Vivian Applewhite. And so they ruled it to be unconstitutional. That came out of the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court. So this is Kiera out of Delaware County, another real human being here, real live people in these cases. This is Kiera out of Delaware County, and she does what you are told to do. She had requested a vote by mail ballot, and the vote by mail ballot did not arrive in time ahead of the 2020 election for her to vote it. And so on election day, she showed up to her polls and she did what we're told to do, which is request a provisional ballot. And so she requested a provisional ballot. She was given one and she voted it and she turned it in before she left the polling location in 2020. Well, after she turned her ballot in, she received a notification saying that someone was challenging her 2020 provisional ballot. Well, it was the courts. It was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that struck down that attempt to throw out her provisional ballot, and her vote counted and her voice was heard. So these are two examples of real situations in Pennsylvania and cases that are heard by the courts. It's not just all about criminal cases. It is about rights and freedoms. The last thing I'll share here with you are some resources that I use to get this information. I'm someone who believes in facts. I believe that people should have accurate information. So I'm sharing with you some places that I go to get credible information. Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts is one of those. Another place that I go to is Alliance for Justice, AFJ. .org. It's a great place to go around hearing about what's happening on federal courts and state courts. And then you can always go to the portals that exist for state government. So the PA state government portals, the US portals as well. All great places to learn, because one of the main reasons people don't vote in these elections or vote all the way down their ballot because they don't know who these judges or justices are. They don't know what they do. They've never seen them. These folks didn't campaign and knock on your door to ask for your vote. And so a lot of times people don't know what to do, and they just decide not to vote for them at all. So we want to make sure that you and your families, take this information tonight, take it back to the kids, make it a group activity, start Googling folks that you see on your ballot and find out if they represent you and your values for you, your family, your community. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions and answers, and I'm going to say, go birds. And I think I'm in a friendly crowd that I can say go birds in this moment. So Kevin, you'll let me know how I did there with enough time. How are we doing here on time? We're good to go?
Oh, fantastic on the time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Kadita. Folks, if you do have questions, drop them in the Q&A box, and we could also open up the chat for a second to make it easier for y'all. And we will also be sharing Kadita's presentation, so you will have that information. Okay.
Did I lose anybody? I see participants went up, so I didn't lose anybody. The number went up, it didn't go down.
Great. Well, not seeing any questions right now, but we still have a few more things to share, folks. So if questions come up, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. Now, we're going to take a few moments to discuss how the courts specifically impact children and families. And then we're going to share the process that we've been undergoing to find out where the judges and candidates stand on issues that impact kids and families. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Stephanie Arbutina. She'll take it from there.
All right, great. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin's going to put up some slides, and Kadita actually already started talking about this. So she did a really great job setting the stage and giving you kind of the basic information. So courts have the power and have the interest in cases that affect so many things that impact children and families, from the environment that we live in, the physical environment, clean air and water, school funding, the rights of parents to care for their children and how they do that, reproductive health care, other health care like mental health, voting rights, children having legal representation, of course, free speech in schools. We're hearing kind of a lot about that right now, and child protection. And I'm just going to touch base on a couple of specific cases, one of which Khadija already mentioned, but some that have, directly shown up in some of the other advocacy work that we do at Children First. And the first and perhaps most significant is that school funding lawsuit that she talked about, which is the William Penn versus the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And that case was filed in 2014 with 6 specific school districts, along with some parents, 2 statewide organizations that filed this lawsuit against legislative leadership, the state education officials, and the governor at the time. Some public interest law centers and a private firm were involved, and they basically said, this funding system that you've got that says a kid lives in a zip code and that determines the type of education they get is in violation of the Pennsylvania's Constitution, which guarantees a thorough and efficient education. And so the fact that the funding was so disparate not only harms students in districts where they don't have as high of property values and property taxes that they're paying. So students in low wealth districts were getting lower quality education. And then of course that impacted not just folks with low income, but folks who English is not their primary language, students of color who tend to be concentrated in those districts. So it just exacerbated existing inequalities. This case went on for 9 years. This often takes a really long time. The legislature, the legislative leaders that were trying to fight it, the Commonwealth Court overruled it and let the case go on. It didn't even start trial until 2021, having been filed in 2014. And Judge Julier handed down her decision, Commonwealth Court judge, on February 7th, 2023. It was like my 6th day working at Children First. And it was like, it was like the day like the moon landing happened in our office. Everyone was so excited because she declared the school funding system unconstitutional. And she denied a motion a couple of months later from those legislative leaders to have post-trial relief. And so that decision is now final. And so, there are several branches of government. We've got the 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. The judge made this decision, and now it's incumbent on the legislature to write that. And so every year in the budget, there's a conversation that's happening about how are they going to then make up for those gaps in funding that were created by the old formula. So that's a constant conversation every year in the budget with the governor's office, with the state legislature, trying to make that funding more equitable as a result of this decision. So that's one big case. And then I'll touch base on another one. Some of you probably are familiar with the big news story. It was a couple of years ago around the Glenville schools. It was a several hundred-year-old institution that housed boys that were in the juvenile justice system. There was an Inquirer expose that basically uncovered decades of abuse of these young boys in the facility, and a lawsuit was filed in April 2019. At around the same time, the license of the facility was revoked at the state level because these children were being abused and the license regulations were being violated. Education Law Center, Juvenile Law Center, and a private firm filed a lawsuit on behalf of those students and their parents. And they sued the Pennsylvania DHS, Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, and the Chester County Intermediate Unit. So it was not just about the physical abuse that they experienced, but also the education that they had a right to, again, under the law, and that they didn't receive that. And honestly, that lawsuit is still ongoing, so I can't even tell you the outcome of all of them. But Chester County Intermediate Unit did settle, and now they've established a fund to provide for compensatory education funding to make up for basically the education that those young people were denied at the time they were there. So these are things that are impacting children and families on a broad level every day at those higher court and coming up in those higher courts that Khadija talked about. So I just wanted to kind of make that connection, especially to some of the topics that we at Children First deal with, and that some of you who are either in coalition with us or advocating alongside us can see how that plays out. So I'll just turn it back to Kevin to talk more about the process that we're going through. You're on mute though.
Thank you for staying with us, folks. We just have a few more minutes and then we'll wrap up. And I see we have some questions coming in. So I do want to note that over the past couple of months, we have been engaging in an evaluation process for the judges that are up for retention, as well as the candidates that are running for open seats. This is all nonpartisan research, and we are going to be sharing our findings very soon. Everything's being formatted for public consumption as we speak. Because as you can imagine, translating some of this legal language into publicly accessible information can take a moment. So be on the lookout for that. We also have coming up a Why Courts Matter 201 on Wednesday, October 8th. Khadija has been kind enough to join us for that as well. So, we're very grateful and looking forward to that. We will send around the slide deck with that registration link. So we really hope you'll join us for that, for a little bit even deeper dive, as well as we'll be sharing some information about the process that we've undergone. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can answer some of the questions y'all have. So I think there's two. So question one, is there a reliable, unbiased source for summary of judges' votes decisions that's accessible to the average voter? The annual voter guides from Citizen, Billy Penn, etc. speak to bar recommendations and background, but not necessarily key prior votes for judges up for retention. Khadija, if you want to take this one, and then I have a little something to add as well.
Sure. So as I mentioned, this is the number one reason why people don't vote all the way down the ballot for these judicial elections, is because they don't have the information they need to make a good decision, they believe, for themselves and their families. So I recommend a few places. I did provide some of the resources that I use. Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts is a great place to provide unbiased, nonpartisan voter information about these judges that are up for retention and also for election. There's also the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which is a nonpartisan organization. What they do is they interview these judges and justices, colleagues, those who have been before them, maybe as lawyers before their courts, looked at their records, look at their temperament, to decide whether or not to endorse them. And when I say endorse, I should say recommend them to be recommended or highly recommended or not recommended at all. So you can always go to the Pennsylvania Bar Association for that information. And the last place I'd mention is another one that we use as an organization, and I just moved it from, oh, here it goes. It is from guides.vote, and they provide a nonpartisan voter guide. If you can see what I have here, they've done that for Pennsylvania. They have listed the 3 justices who are up for retention and list the kind of court cases they've heard and how they've decided on those court cases, and then also mentions some of their areas of interest for them as an individual, as a person, so you can learn more about these people, because they are human beings, right? That just happen to be judges and justices, to learn more about them. So places like that, guides.vote, great place to go. And these are in Spanish and English, if you need that as well. So you have some nonpartisan, just factual information about these folks.
Yes, thank you, Khadija. And I also want to note that as part of our research and analysis process, we have been researching decisions at the Supreme Court that impact children and families. And so that will be, part of the information that we will be releasing shortly. We have also extended interview invitations with candidates at the Commonwealth and family court levels. Family court as a part of Court of Common Pleas levels. And so we've interviewed some folks, and that will also be coming out shortly. And so hopefully with all of these different sources, voters can make an informed decision. Great. And I think we have one last question. What is behind so many of the judges running unopposed or with just enough candidates for the number of open seats? Is this controlled by the respective parties of the candidates to limit voter choice?
Yeah. Okay. So again, this is a nonpartisan call that we're having here this evening, and I really can't answer what political parties are doing in terms of whether or not they're selecting just the amount of folks that they want to endorse or, put together on a slate that would just fulfill that. But we do have primary elections ahead of the general elections. And in the primary elections, that is an opportunity for us to have the candidates of our choosing to appear on the general. And you will also hear that there is cross filing that happens during the primary election, where folks from, they may be a Republican any other day of the year, but they cross file as Democrats in order to have a better shot at appearing on the ballot in November as another political party. So yeah, so as it relates to, what political parties are doing, I can't speak to what they do. I try my best not to get involved in party politics. But yes, the fact that there are vacancies or just the appropriate amount of folks or folks running unopposed. I mean, these are also turned into expensive races. Before it didn't cost a lot of money to actually want to run for a judgeship. You could just run. But now, Wisconsin had $100 million judicial election. So some people just don't want to put themselves out there. And if we're being really honest, some of these judges and justices could make more money in private practice, but they are absolutely, many of them, trying to do what's good for the community, and they want to be judges and justices and make a lot less money. So you may find that that's a situation as well, where some folks choose not to be put themselves in that position. So there's a lot of factors that can go into that. I can't speak to what political parties are doing or if they're monitoring that to stop folks, but again, magisterial courts that I talked about earlier, some of those remain vacant for a long time. People don't want to run in those, but they don't even know that you don't need to be a lawyer even to run in that election. So that's how I'd answer that question, I guess.
Great. Thank you, Khadija. Any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, hearing none, we'll hop off. I want to thank all of the attendees here for spending your Wednesday night with us. Thank you to Inella and Stephanie, and thank you so much, Khadija, for sharing this wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
look,
very much for having me. And I learned something from Stephanie tonight. I'm going to use this in my future presentation. So thank you, Stephanie.
great. Oh, and look at that. It's 7:29, right on time. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.